The Time Shift.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Time Shift. This week I'm reviewing the latest episode of Doctor Who titled Lucky Day, and we kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the story, the writing and tangentially related matters. Now I'll just say that I do have the window open because it's still rather warm at the moment, so if you hear any dogs or anything barking, then I don't know, just imagine that they're space dogs! Ooh! Anyway, to actually talk about the episode itself, look everybody, Pete McTinge is back! And this is probably the best episode of Doctor Who that Pete McTinge has ever written! Whey! Which, I will admit, does feel like damning with faint praise, given just how much I didn't particularly like his previous efforts in Doctor Who, but you know what, those past efforts I don't think were terrible. I don't think it was quite a Peter Harness issue for me, but at the same time, look, they're not exactly episodes I'm falling over myself to go back and rewatch anytime soon. This is an episode which I think is largely good, but I think that its handling of the moral was slightly cack-handed, and I think that, well, more than slightly cack-handed for reasons I'll discuss over the course of this video, and also I think that the whole end of it doesn't quite work for me. It's all within the writing, it's all within the execution of it, because I will just say is I think that this is an episode which, for better or worse, really does end up feeling like a Chibnal era episode. It is an episode which spends an extended amount of its runtime really developing the character of Conrad, giving us what we think is an insight into them as a character, giving us an opportunity to understand who they are and where they've come from and how they've got into this life that they are in. There are certain elements of their life that don't quite add up, but I don't mean that in a case of, oh, they're teasing a big reveal later on, but more so that, do you really know what a podcast is kind of a deal. I mean, it's obviously know what a podcast is, but there's certain elements of it which don't quite work, but we'll get onto that shortly. The first 15-20 minutes is spent setting up what something that feels like it would be a very traditional Doctor Who story, something that's very typical of this era, particularly with a character that has been with the Doctor and they're now trying to get their life back on track. You know, they're trying to get used to the fact that life is kind of a bit mundane now, and they're just trying to get used to the fact that time is very linear and they're not defeating monsters. But as the episode progresses, they do something more with that rather than the wistful,
"Oh, golly geez, I wish I was off exploring planets with the Doctor again,"
as it seems to be the case with the post-lifespan of every single companion who travelled with the Doctor and now is back making a cameo appearance. But that's a discussion that we'll cross later on in the episode, probably more so when we get into the performance side of things. That first 10 to 20 minutes, like I say, feels very much like a Chibnal era episode, for better for worse. It spends an extended amount of its time building up the characters, give us an insight into them. And on the one hand, this is great for two reasons. First of all is the fact it actually makes it so that had this been a more traditional Doctor Who episode, that when bad things would happen, we would end up feeling more of a connection to Conrad as he goes through all of this. Yes, we have the thing of when they go into the village and, oh, here are all my friends, and I just wrote in my notes, oh, here's our extended expendable cast, here are all the characters that are going to get killed off over the course of the episode, and then at the end of the episode, either Conrad will sacrifice himself, or he and Ruby will end up becoming an item, and oh, love, true kiss, and all that malarkey. But that isn't the case, because we get the twist midway through the episode that Conrad is a secret git. So when we have all that build-up of thinking he's just a nice guy that's lived a difficult life, that he's just the victim of circumstance, he never really got the adventures with the Doctor, and he never had all the life and the love in his life that he really could have, should have had. Oh, it turns out he isn't, and he's just a colossal git, and that makes that twist far more impactful. Had this been a more typical episode of Doctor Who, we'd probably have just spent about 5 minutes or so with him being really nice and dreamy and lovely, with maybe a few suspicious looks here and there because of something maybe revealed, and then come minute 6 or minute 7, oh, it turns out he's a secret arsehole all along! Oh, how long have we got left on the episode? 40 minutes? Oh dear! That's basically the thrust of how an episode like this otherwise would have gone, but that's not what we're dealing with here. That's not what we're dealing with, because it turns out, like I say, that he's a secret git, and I think that this, I like that twist. I really do like the twist. I wish that something more had been done with that with regards to the story itself, because I think that they use this far too much for the moral message, and it's a moral message which, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, is one that I think isn't executed anywhere near as well as it really should be. And I think a lot of that comes down to two main issues. One is the issue that I have that, look, something like this wouldn't happen like this. Like, you can't leak government secrets and then just get let off after 24 hours. Like, this is the kind of thing that, you know, you get sent off to a black site over. This isn't a thing of they go, well, it was just freedom of speech. No, that's not how it works in the real world, mate. They'd have shut down that stream within 10 seconds of the realising something's up. Or they would have used all their equipment to make sure that, yeah, this isn't what you think it is. You know, you wouldn't get let off with this. But hey-ho, I suppose we have to suspend the realities of how, you know, revealing government secrets would have gone for the sake of the episode. And the other issue that I have is the fact of just how ridiculous it escalates so quickly. Like, the idea of, yes, they quote expose UNIT as being a fraud, and then people start taking against UNIT, and yes, you need to have that build in order to have the big thing of defund UNIT, stuff that comes along later in the episode, but it builds up in such a cartoonishly over-the-top and silly way that it's hard to take it seriously. Like, you could have just done a simple case of just spanning this descent, spanning this twist and this series of turns out over the course of several months, and I think it would have made it a lot more stomachable. But instead we get this montage of all these interviews and all these news broadcasts from around the world, and they get the bit on the Masked Singer, and it all feels very quick. It all feels like this is all done over the course of about a week or so, when really this kind of collapse really shouldn't have happened so quickly. And of course there will be people that will quite rightly point out and say, wait a sec, why do people think that all the aliens and stuff is nonsense and is made up? Why do they think that? Because wasn't it over only a year ago when aliens were invading? Like, this is a world where London gets invaded by aliens like every other week. By this point, you know, wouldn't people accept that this is just a fact of life? But of course, modern Doctor Who, that's the main flaw of it. You could have these big step-piece moments and everyone just kind of forgets about it because
humanity's greatest superpower is its ability to forget.
Shove that up your ass, mate. Good lord. But in any case, this is an episode which really wants to play onto its moral message. Its moral message is about misinformation and how that can spread and evolve. Okay. But the problem is the fact, as I say, I think that it shows that evolution happening in far too quickly. Yes, I know that we live in the information or misinformation age, depending on your point of view, and that these things can spread out rapidly across the world, but it spreads out in such a cartoonishly over-the-top way that it kind of makes it hard to really, you know, accept this as being, well, realistic or practical or logical in any extent. Part of this, like I say, is due to the pacing of just how things evolve very quickly, in a way which just feels so cartoonishly silly that it undermines the point of it. Also, it's part of the fact that something like this would not be allowed to be leaked by the government. This is an international, multinational government agency that is trying to protect the planet with access to all these high-tech gadgets and gizmos. They aren't going to let this happen. Like, not to go off into too far of an area, because this might go off into too far of an area, but YouTube and other websites, they have aspects to their algorithm which can detect certain kinds of content, and if it detects that certain kind of content, even if it's being broadcast live, it'll just shut the stream down. If there's any suspicion of, oh, someone's leaking government secrets. And an organisation, a multinational organisation like UNIT, probably has a little button they can just press to, oh, we block the screen, we block the feed. But no, apparently not. And they made no effort to discredit the misinformation. They just kind of sat there and just took it. They just accepted it in a way in which they really bloody wouldn't. And you've also got the simple issue that is that I don't think enough was really done to establish what this podcast exactly is. I know they didn't need to do some big meet and greet, they didn't need to do some kind of big montage, but at the start of this, when Ruby goes onto Conrad's little podcast thing, it isn't really established, okay, how big is this podcast? How much reach does it have? How many subscribers does it have? How are they able to afford this kind of office space? Do they have this office space because they're really popular and they really connect with the people, have a massive audience? Or is it because the people that made and directed this episode just went, oh, they have a podcast, so let's stick them in an office? Like, nothing's really done to establish its reach. Nothing's really done to establish why it looks the way that it is, what exactly it is. This is some kind of paranormal podcast? Is there something that is going on here that we don't know about? Because you'd think, if nothing else, Ruby would know what podcast she was going on to. So if this really is the kind of podcast that's going to expose the truth, units really out of their mind, man, they're not who they say they are, man, she'd know that, because she works for an intelligence agency, and they'd be able to tell by the information that they're gathering and the information that they're broadcasting that these guys aren't on the level, that they're a bunch of nutters, that they are a national security, an international, a global security risk if they get into the wrong place. Like, you could literally just look over the past few episodes and figure that out. Because the way they present themselves, the way that this think tank, however it is, podcast that Conrad does, they present themselves in a very aggressive, very we're going to expose the truth kind of way. And that kind of reputation, that kind of attitude is the one you just cultivate over the course of months and years. So she would have known about this if she did the modicum of research into it, which you'd expect for someone that works in counterintelligence. Which is effectively what she's working in. Guys, seriously, she works for an intelligence agency. She would have done the background check. Everybody else would have done. The people that she works for would have done that just to make sure of it. Like, the extra guy who betrays, oh sure, they didn't know about that. Maybe you can excuse them not thinking to look into his internet history when he's going to work for an organisation that deals with aliens and multi-dimensional threats every other weekend. But even still, she's going out with someone who does a podcast that's based around paranormal stuff. Wouldn't somebody have looked into that at some point? Of course, that would have stopped the episode from being able to exist, but maybe if we'd established what the podcast is, then we get the true reveal. Like, he presents himself as though he does this kind of cutesy, nice guy, little, oh, we're just talking about ghosts and UFOs, and that's kind of twee and innocent, but then he actually runs this secret other podcast where he exposes the truth. You know, maybe that could be a thing. And in my notes, something I wrote was that, or something that I wrote, is that isn't this all a bit of a missed opportunity? Like, this is a guy that's interviewing a past companion of the Doctor, and in the run-up to this, they could have easily done a short little podcast series where Conrad interviews past companions of the Doctor. And just goes for that, and it would have been a great little way to really build up the hype for the new season, as well as give a little bit of a nod in the cap to classic era Doctor Who companions, and you could have them playing in character, and maybe he's asking them about stuff that, you know, they can't talk about because Unit would, you know, wag their finger at them for doing so, and, you know, that could be a bit of meta advertising, as well as possibly give us some kind of hint that, oh, what's the real truth behind it? And then you could have that thing of, oh, here's this nice guy, cutesy little podcast that just advertising the upcoming series, but then here's this secret podcast that you can find by writing the secret password in, and now he's exposing the truth of what's really going on. Oh, those Yetis in the underground, they weren't cyborgs, they were just guys in suits, so we got the evidence to prove it. And then they could just, like, throw some, like, behind-the-scenes shots, because that's their proof that it's not real. You know, that'd be cool, that'd be interesting. Like, you get the in-universe build-up for all of this, but at the same time, you also get, like, some really cool meta background information on the production of Doctor Who. But they didn't do that kind of stuff, which is a bit of a shame. Like I say, the big issue that I have was that is a great twist midway through the episode, but it's how it's then built out from that point on. How quickly everything is just then falls apart. It's cartoonish and silly. But of course, like, you can argue that, you know, misinformation spreading, and also the fact that we don't get much of a We don't get much of a timescale, so maybe this is happening over the course of several months. I don't know. And I'll be honest, I kind of accept this misinformation spreading in the short period of time that it does do, more so than the world of My Hero Academia falling apart after one bad day. But hey ho, that's a whole of a series of a whole of a set of videos. My issue is, well, like I say, one is the fact of just how quickly everything falls apart, and also the ending itself. For two reasons. One is a performance issue, which I will talk about when I get into the performance things, and the second is the whole... I get what they're trying to do here, but it's obvious what they're trying to do. When the Doctor confronts Connor, and we have this thing about how he is undermining what the Doctor's doing, that speech isn't just supposed to be the Doctor bollocking Connor. It's supposed to be more of the thing of, oh, the Doctor represents truth, and the Doctor represents the real world, and people that actually want to help the world and save the world, and Connor represents the misinformation, the people saying, oh, this is fake, don't bother about it. That's the thrust, that's the deeper subtext of that scene, and it's incredibly obvious that that is that case. With this scene being different, all they would have really have done is just remove the we, because the Doctor talks about the things that we do and how we fight and the things that we do to make the world better. When really, if he said I, it would still have ultimately had the same subtext to it, because whilst he's talking about his point of view, and it is the Doctor saying, look, I can't have people going around telling people that Daleks don't exist and Cybermen don't exist because it makes my job harder. It also ends up there having the same meta thing of, we can't have people going around saying misinformation left and right because it makes the world a lot harder for people trying to save the world and defeat stuff and make the world a better, safer place. But it's the inclusion of the we which makes it a lot more heavy-handed, a lot more deliberate. And it is the issue with the episode, which is at the core of it, it wants to do an episode about misinformation and tackling misinformation. Great, good, okay. Largely done well for the most part, but then you have the issue of it being very heavy-handed. Well, just one more thing before we get into the performances, I will say is that two things. One, I liked the soundtrack until Maury Golded it. Like when it was that deeper, spookier, scarier synth stuff, that was fantastic. But then it started again, stuff kicking in again. And the other thing that I really didn't like was the CG on the monster towards the end of the episode. Like up until that moment, we had some really great practical effects stuff with some really cool looking costumes. And then, oh, these are just goofy costumes. Don't worry about it, man. And yeah, the CG at the end of it looked really crappy. I know it's not like a meta thing of, oh, CG is better than practical effects. I know it's not that, but at the same time, oh god, it would have looked so much cooler. Like if it really did just look like a guy in a suit when it really wasn't, that would have played the whole thing of, oh, it's just a fake before, ah, my arm! Would have been worked it better. And the final thing that really does really screw over that ending, like if we ignore the fact of him saying we rather than I, and it being very obvious and very heavy-handed what point of view the Doctor has in that final speech, the whole thing of him saying to him, you're gonna die alone in prison at the age of 49 when your heart packs out, that's a really great moment, but then it's undermined by Mrs. Flood coming along and whistling and letting him out of prison. Like, it really does just suck so much out of it. Like, had it just been a case of the Doctor says to this guy, you're going to die alone and afraid, and no one's going to remember who you are, and no one's going to care, and then the episode just ends with Connor standing there looking smug with that shit-eating grin on his face going, ha, this is all fake, this isn't real, none of it's real, and then you just slowly pan away, you just pull the camera back, and you just see the darkness of the corridor around him, and the only lit bit is him in his little prison cell just smiling away at himself as he just slowly fades away into nothingness, and he's just gradually forgotten as he just sit there thinking to himself, yeah, it's all fake, any moment now the walls will fall over and the set will reveal itself, and this will all be fake. It'll all be fake, guys, it'll all be fake, as he just slowly shrinks down into nothingness as the camera pulls back and pulls back and pulls back. That would have been a better way to end it, but no. It's, oh, I'm the governor, and I was letting you off because this is your lucky day, mate. I'm Mrs. Floodman. Way! Anyway, that's going into how I would have done it territory, but we'll get into the performances. And this sees the return of Millie Gibson as Ruby Sunday, and probably the best performance she's ever given with a character, as this week it actually feels as though there's depth and nuance to the character, both in terms of the performance but also the writing. This is an episode which shows the aftermath of the living and working and travelling with the Doctor in a way which feels a lot more human, a lot more grounded and gritty and understandable than the usual, oh golly gee willikers, I wish I was still travelling with the Doctor post-adventure stuff that we end up getting with so many other characters like this. It shows her having to deal with the PTSD of having travelled with the Doctor, something we haven't really seen since the days of Ryan back in the Chris Chibnal era, who was a character that was dealing with the PTSD of travelling to a period in human history where humanity had wiped itself out in nuclear war. A great plot thread with that character that went nowhere. You know, saying that out loud, that makes me wonder if maybe this episode had been originally intended to be a Chibnal era episode, and maybe the character would have followed here would not have been Ruby, but instead would have been Ryan. There's an interesting thing I've just thrown out into the universe, but hey ho! I think that the episode itself is still good, and I think that the writing of Ruby Sunday in this episode gives her a level of depth and an aspect to her character that we didn't see before. Someone who can be vulnerable, but at the same time can be sufficiently sparky and defensive in order to not be a complete quivering wreck. And that she isn't the typical Doctor Who golly gee shucks let's go on adventure thing that she was during the time of her period as a companion. I will also say that Johan Hewer King, I'm definitely getting that name mispronounced as Conrad, did a great job. He was really able to sell the dreamy, cutesy, male Doctor Who companion vibe in the first half of the episode, and then really transition into just being a horrible little bastard in the second half of it. I really wish that more had just been done to really play into the fact that he is this bitter loser that's really butthurt about the fact that no one really wanted to bring him into unit, and that there is this power, this lust for power within him. But I suppose that's something we'll get more of if and when he returns to the series, because I think that at the heart of it there's still some really fantastic stuff here. At the heart of it there's some really great aspects of the character, but I do wish that this was a character that then built out a little bit more, that we got to see that darker side of him a lot better, and it wasn't just done with the sake of just stuff in the background. Like, whilst I say I'm not a massive fan of the whole montage bit that we get to in the midpoint of the episode, I think it would have been neat that maybe as a result of all of that we actually got to see him in these interviews where he's just going through how fake and how nonsensical unit is. Like, again, you go back to some classic footage from classic Doctor Who and going, oh, that's just a guy in a suit, that's not really the Loch Ness monster, it's just a guy in a suit, it's just a special effect. Which on the one hand would have the meta gag of ha 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 old Doctor Who effects, but also would have the oh it's all fake man kind of thing. But again, this is going into how I would have done it territory. Cutie Gatwa again. I think that ending scene with him had the potential to be a fantastic moment, and he does it well enough. But the problem is the fact that I think that was a scene that needed the Doctor to be a lot more angry and a lot more angsty than what we really got with him. Like, he's whether it's a deliberate part of the performance or not, it still has a confident swagger to it, which I don't think the Doctor would have in that moment, because Conrad has just not only put the planet at peril, he's also put the people that Doctor cares about at peril by being a colossal dickhead. So I don't think he would be quite as swaggering about it. I think he might have been swaggering about it after he's told him you're going to die alone in prison, because at that point he's just showing to the guy just how little he really cares for him. He's tried to be reasonable, he's told him the reality of what he's doing, and now he's telling him no one's going to remember you and no one's going to care when you die, and he just goes about the rest of his day as though nothing's happened, as though Conrad's just dirt on his shoe. I think that would have been a better way in doing it, but I think that ultimately comes down to the writing of it, because I think that it's too much of a speech of the moment, it's too much of a speech about the politics of the moment. Which is the point, and is the point of the episode more broadly, but I think that it plays it in a way which there is no depth to it, there is no double entendre here, it's just explicitly, this is an episode about misinformation, and here is a speech about misinformation, which I think is the ultimate letdown of the episode. With that in mind, let us get into the overview itself, and in the overview I will say is I think this is a very strong episode, but I think that it loses its footing midway through it. It loses its footing where it tries so hard to really play into the misinformation moral of the story, and it plays its hand so forcefully that it undermines the rest of the episode. Like, we didn't need the montage of footage all across the world of different newscasters across the world and the Masked Singer cameo to underline just how much this is going out of control. We didn't really need that. We just needed to establish this is a podcast that gets a lot of people watching it, and now it's established. Now we've revealed the truth and it's going viral. Like, we could literally have just cut from it going viral, him doing his broadcast, to just a quick montage. Like, even just the stuff for the TikToks would have been fine, and then you cut to people throwing eggs and such at the taxis and such. That would have been fine, that would have been enough, but it over-eggs the custard to such an extent that it becomes too hard to really stomach for me. It becomes a little bit too much, it goes a little bit too far, then it starts to become too much of a, here is the message now, pay attention, you'll be tested on this after the episode's over, which is a shame, because this otherwise could have been a fantastic episode, but it kind of fumbles it towards the end of it. With that said and done, however, let us get into Comment Corner. It's time for Comment Corner. I'm going to only do this one quickly. We got a comment from Biglex1 that says, I like where this season is going. I wish this one was scary. This goes referring to the previous episode, but I think it's a better season than the last one. Thank you for your comment. I have to agree. I think this season, pound for pound, is significantly better than the previous one. Though we said last year's season felt like a very much of a damp squid. But hey, let me know what you thought about this episode. Let me know what you thought about this season thus far. Let me know, and you'll get read out in a future video, maybe. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!